Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. I am delighted to be joined tonight by Dr. Traci Baxley, who is the author of Social Justice Parenting, which is the book we are celebrating and discussing this evening. Dr. Traci Baxley is a professor, consultant, parenting coach, speaker, mother to 5 biracial children, and the creator of Social Justice Parenting. She's an educator for over 30 years with degrees in child development, elementary education, and curriculum and instruction. She specializes in diversity and inclusion, anti-bias curriculum, and social justice education. She lives with her husband and children in Boca Raton, Florida, and she's joining us today on the very first day of her book tour. So we're very honored to get to help you launch this book. Congratulations.
Thank you. I am very excited, but almost like, you have this anticipation and I finally could kind of breathe a little bit. So it's kind of nice trying to stay present, but I'm excited.
Great. Yeah. So this is your first book, but of course you have been doing a lot of writing as part of your work your whole life. How is it different to be putting all of your thoughts in one place?
It's different in terms of I'm used to writing more in academic language, and so trying to make this change from what is expected from me as a professor to what I wanted to write in this book in terms of meeting parents where they are and having like real dialogue and chats. I feel like I'm chatting with the parents who are going to be reading it was a transition for me. But I loved it because I think even in the academic world, this is where I belong. Like I belong with the people. And I always try to kind of bridge that. So this has been a warm welcoming for me in my writing.
How did you figure out the tone? Because I think it was in the root, maybe, you talking about a movement of mothers, right? And particularly talking to Black mothers in that moment in 2020 about needing that community. And then the sort of scope of this book has broadened out to be, the audience is multiracial. A lot of the book is explicitly geared towards white mothers. And even talk about a mosaic of mothers, right? So can you talk a little bit about sort of how you began to shape the audience and for this book, and also the tone, and how I don't know, maybe you had to go through several passes to kind of get the tone right, or maybe it came out right on the pass.
I think when I first started writing the book, it was a question of who's my audience, right? Because I felt the need to connect to other Black mothers who were feeling the same things I was feeling in a lot of ways. This need to really kind of talk to our kids, hold our kids tighter, walk this journey with them in such a racialized world. But I also thought about the need to educate white moms who may not know what to do, but who want to do something. And so I try to kind of bridge that a little bit. There are some chapters, especially the anti-racist chapter, that is geared for white moms because it's kind of telling my truth as a Black mother and what I feel and how I feel that they can be allies with me and other moms of color. The foundations of social justice parenting is really for all moms who want to raise their children to be more compassionate, more kind, and who really want to raise a new generation of kids who really want to be change agents in the world. And I think that's all of us who deserve to have space to do that. And so ultimately, that's kind of where I landed with the book.
And one of the things that I really loved is that you begin the book talking about radical love as the foundation. And Karis, we talk about radical hospitality as the foundation for our work. So basically, for folks at home who don't know, radical hospitality, it's actually an old Christian ideal of meeting people wherever they are in their journey and being as open-hearted and as welcoming to the least among us, not in a condescending way, but to people who have the fewest resources, right?
Yes.
And not trying to change people, but trying to literally say, here you are, I'm coming to, walk alongside you for a while, and we're going to teach each other things, right? And radical love, as I understand it, has some similar qualities. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, they very similar, right? It's about um, how we connect and show up for others, right? How we love in a way that we see the humanity in other people, and what our role and responsibilities are in making sure that other people's needs are being met. It's about actively listening. It's about open dialogue. It's about really learning about other people and loving them at the core of who they are in terms of their humanness, um, and finding ways to connect and to support um, even the people that you're different from. So I think they're very, very similar.
And really supporting your children as whole people with agency. That comes through very strongly in the book, is that your relationship to your children is really trying to nurture them as whole people with full lives who sometimes get on your nerves, but often, you're really proud of
Right.
them. It's clear how much you um, honor their personhood. And I think one of the things that is often interesting to me is the ways in which white supremacy um shuts down white parents' ability to see their children's personhood too, because
Mm.
if you can't, not obviously it shuts down our ability to see people of color's personhood, but it also does it to our own children, because if you're always saying, shh, don't say that, don't notice that, we all colorblind, we're all good people here, that is a kind of gaslighting of our own children, right? And so one of the things that I really love about your book, that I think a lot of parents are going to connect to, white parents and parents of color, is this, like, how do you model vulnerability with your children, and how do you stop and say, I don't actually know the answer to that question, maybe we need to research it together, right? So can
Yes.
you talk a little bit about how you came to that place of um I would say humility in being a parent, because a lot of parents are very much like, I know everything, children are to be seen and not heard. How did you and your husband too come to this place of, our children have things to teach us?
It was a journey, especially for my husband, because he's like, he was raised that every child gets disciplined. Every child, you show up for the same child the same way, and I think through my education, child development and elementary school, those ideas really came through for me as a parent, because I really think it was important to see each of my students, and it just kind of spilled over into me being a mother. But also, it doesn't work. That's the bottom line, right? So what I did with my daughter, who's my oldest, was one way, but my oldest son, it didn't work with him. And so I either had to keep banging my head against the wall, right? Or I had to figure out, how am I going to parent this child that's in front of me, and not the child that I thought I was going to have, or the child who's very different from his sibling. And so when I'm able to step back from that, and listen to my kids, because they tell us what they need. Sometimes we think we know better, and sometimes we actually don't. And I think part of that is that reflection that I think rings true in the book, that we always have to be in a state of, am I doing this because it's the way that I've always done it? Am I doing this because I don't know any other tools right now? Am I doing this because it was the way that I was raised? And it's not necessarily the way that my children need to be interacted with, or disciplined, or cheered on. So part of it is learning as you go, obviously. Um, and then one thing, because I'm an empath, I'm really good at reflection, because it helps me process all the feelings that I have. So in some senses, I think being an empath is my superpower, because it helps me with those other things. But I think when parents have a hard time reflecting, it makes the job of parenting a little bit more difficult.
I think you're right. And I think, one of the things that I want folks to know about this book is that you have journaling exercises in the book. You have opportunities. I think a lot of people are not raised to think about their feelings. A lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds are not encouraged to be self-reflective for a lot of reasons, right? Trauma, hard stuff happening in your family. And many people are raised to just keep, get up, go to work, keep your head down, do the best you can, right? And I think then they put that on their kids
Yes.
and just repeat cycles of trauma, right? And so if we don't lift our heads up and think a little bit about how we're moving forward in the world, we do repeat these cycles. And as you said, each child feels that very differently. That one size fits all thing that we may be carrying from our own parents or grandparents, it's not working for us either, right? But
That's right.
we're trying to impose it. And sometimes, unless we have a partner or spouse or therapist or friend who's like, I don't, that's not working, you know, often we don't stop and realize it, or have a child who really um, has a crisis or a moment
Right.
where you have to realize it. But hopefully for people, they get to that point before their child has a crisis, right? Because the goal is to kind of have this be more integrated into the day to day.
Yes. And even too, um, ER, I can think about like my daughter who had moments of depression, right? Where I say she's now winning with depression instead of struggling with depression. Um, but when we have the conversations about that, she tells me, and again, this is I'm trying to shed a light on this because this is what I do for a living, and there's still things that I missed, right? So I am like the belonging advocate, right? It's what I do, what I teach. But my daughter tells a story about we were giving her so many opportunities to have things that we didn't have as kids that we missed, that it was too much for her, and that she felt like all of these things we were throwing at her, she had to be great at. And when she wasn't great at it, she felt like she was disappointing us, or she felt like she wasn't perfect in it, and that was something that made her less than or made her not worthy. And you can think you're doing everything right, and this is why it's so important to have these open dialogues with your children, because you don't sometimes you may miss it in the day-to-day interactions with your children. And if they don't have a safe place to have those conversations, um, like you said, we want to make sure that they don't get in crisis mode before you're able to deal with what's going on with them.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you talk about fear a lot in the book, and you talk about it from a couple different angles. And I think, I'll just read a quote. You said, "So I'll ask you again, are you parenting from a place of fear or radical love? When you say you are an ally or an activist, but you still want to keep your children in the protected, fear-based bubble, you need to question what that means." And that's specifically in the chapter geared towards white parents thinking about raising anti-racist children. Um, but I think it applies across the board in all aspects of raising um, social justice minded children, right? And trying to create those
Absolutely.
values in their family. It's like anything that is fear based decision making is going to shut us down and keep us from growing a healthy connection with our family and really with our communities, right? Um, so can you say a little bit about sort of some fear busting things that we might do, or practices we might try?
Yeah, and you're right. You can take out the race issue and you could put in the LGBTQ issues. You could bring in issues in social economics. Really, it's any of these things that it could be sex, it could be death, anything that we have a hard time talking to our kids about, any truths that we have a hard time talking to our children about. We need to reevaluate the way we're showing up, right? Because those are our fears and our anxiety that we're putting on our children. They don't have the hangups about some of these topics the way we do as adults. And so having hard, honest conversations about these topics really, in the long run, make sure children feel more safe because you're giving them space to have um, taboo or difficult conversations, where their questions can be answered, where they can, lean into their curiosities more, and be able to wrestle with whatever the issue or topic is. And so I think, when you trying to move away from this fear-based parenting, um, it to me it's almost like a mindset shift, right? Because when I'm parenting from this fear, trying to keep my children safe and not telling them things that are going on in the real world, or deciding when and how I'm going to tell them, um, you're really thinking about your own kid. You're not thinking about the kids who don't have the privilege to be protected from that. Some of us have to have this race-based conversations because our kids' lives depend on it. And so whenever you are thinking about how you're navigating these spaces, and if you're doing it for protection, if you can think about it beyond your child, and like, how can you protect my child too? And part of that is telling your children the truth. So, the first thing I would say is just think beyond your own household. And I really believe in this idea of the village. Like,
Mhm.
we're all global citizens, we're all this global village, that it really takes all of us to make the shifts that we need to make the world. It's so saying sounds so cliche, but to really make the world better for all of us, we all have to be involved. And so, I would ask you to think about, how am I protecting all of the kids and not just my own? And that should help you start to think about, um, letting go of some of the fear, to saying that this is only protecting my own child, not those out there who can't be protected because of their various identities.
One of the reasons that we started the Race Conscious Parenting Collective is because of the statistic that we read that on average, families of color talk with their children organically about race from birth, and white families talk to our children about race starting at age 13.
Wow.
And that 13-year age gap is the source of so many of our country and the world's problems, right? Like, we are spending so much time and sorrow and money and all these things trying to catch up on that 13-year age gap, which frankly is almost impossible to catch up on in full grown adults, you know?
Yeah, and think about how much misinformation has happened in those 13 years,
Yeah.
right?
And
All the stuff you have to unlearn and relearn, and gaps you have to fill in those years.
I'll have white parents with a straight face tell me, they're mad that their mother lied to them about Santa Claus, but they're not ready to tell their 5-year-old about race. And I'm like,
Yeah, what
not,
about that?
yeah. I think one of the things that's really important about your book is thinking through how we, um, like, a lot of white people are conditioned within families to talk about race the same way we talk about sex, which is like, we're going to have one conversation ever. It's going to be real stressful. Everybody's going to be real uptight about it. And then we're never going to talk about it again. Right. And the
Sure.
same is, yeah, done. And the same is true. You have an example about, people who are, living on the streets, or, insufficiently housed, or, often any kind of otherness or anything that's perceived to be tricky. It's like, we're going to talk about this one time, and then you are never to bring it up in public again, right? And preferably not in private either. And so
Yes,
so
yes,
much,
that's that fear.
yeah, right. And so much of your book is about integrating these conversations into daily life in ways that, one of the things that we often talk about is, if you only have one conversation ever with your child about sex or race or violence or any of these things, the stakes of that conversation are monumentally high, right? That's
That's
impossible
right.
to have
Yes.
a conversation well. But if you are talking nonstop with your child from the time they are born, no single conversation is that big of a deal, right? And I think your book really models that so beautifully. So, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, you have a couple different acronyms that you use in the book. Um, but I think, first, let's actually just talk about what a social justice home is. So you say it's
Mhm.
grounded in the lives, interests, and experiences of each family member. and then it's pro-justice and empathetic. It is reflective and dialogic. It's accountable, and it is one that acknowledges we are all in process. So can you say a little bit kind of about that grounding and how
Yeah,
it
yes.
relates to the rest?
Yeah, so I think if we recognize that we're always evolving, right? We're always changing. So are our kids, always changing. And if we give them space to change, right? And to acknowledge that, like, nobody wants to live in a house where mistakes are not forgiven, right? Or mistakes are seen as something negative. It's a part of our growing. And so the same thing when we're learning about new topics, new information, that is also a part of the learning. And so homes that are really pro justice allows that space to have the conversations, right? To grow and to learn, to make the mistakes, and to really create space for open dialogue. And I think the more you're talking about it, the more normalized it becomes, and the more the kids will take that out into the world. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that we don't know it all, right? I know a lot of teenagers are often like, I know my kids say to me, "Mom, that's in the olden days." Like, and I think we need to acknowledge the voices of our children, right? They do know a lot. And so us not pretending that we know it all, because I think in learning that our parents don't have all the answers, it's teaching our kids that they don't have to have all the answers too. And I think when you are a pro justice home, you are giving grace and space for those conversations to happen. And the more we're having those conversations, the more, as a mom, I can see what my kids really know, and uh, where the gaps are, um, and what are they getting wrong in terms of maybe stereotyping. And the more conversations we can have around that, the more I'm able to kind of fill those gaps in. So it goes back to what you were saying about, the one conversation. It's high stakes when it's one conversation, but when it's built into your home, um, you get to kind of navigate where they're missing parts, and you get to fill those in as your kids are growing and changing.
You have a good story where your child told another child about, the reality of the world, similar to like telling a kid about Santa Claus, actually.
Yes.
And then, they the mother seemed actually to be somewhat okay about it, but was a little surprised that her child knew about I think sexual development or
Yeah.
development.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you basically got to take your child aside and say not everybody explains things in the same way that we explain. But I do think that's a lot of parents' fear. Like, I don't want, not only do I not want my child to be the weirdo at school who knows more than other kids know, but I also don't want to be branded as the weird, like, radical mother and then ostracized from the mother group, which again goes back to fear. But
Yeah.
I encounter that enough that I think it is something that people do need acknowledged. Because even though that seems like a superficial fear, like, why do you care what other parents at the school think of you? People care. So do you
Yeah.
have any advice about, like, for parents who are just kind of dipping their toes into this and they don't want to feel like an outcast, that they're, because it can feel sort of mean girl dynamic among parents,
Definitely.
you know,
Definitely. Yes.
like some of this stuff brings up our high school trauma.
It does. It does. Yes. And I probably should, if looking back, I should have had that conversation with my kids early first too. Like, this is what we do in our family. It's not the same way that everybody else navigates in their own families. So when we have these hard conversations, we have these kind of deep dialogues. Talk to me before you talk to other people, because I mean, and another story that I brought up was when my mother-in-law found out she had breast cancer. My husband and I wanted to tell our kids right away, to explain it to them. We took children's literature. We read what that means, why Grammy can't pick you up, why she may lose her hair. And my sister-in-law decided she didn't want to tell. And so we had to also navigate that space. Like, your cousins don't know. We have to give your aunt, to space to do that the way she wants to do it with her cousins. And so I think starting conversations off with that sometimes is necessary. The other thing I would say too is surround yourself with your village, right? So that there's a couple other moms that are growing like you are, and that you have a core group of mothers and families that you can do this kind of growth with. And I think if we're all taking steps growing toward that, let's talk to our kids about these things so that they know and they're equipped to deal with them in the world, then that's one of the shifts that we can make in changing the way that things are right now.
Yeah, because then, I mean, similar to sort of dispersing the stakes across many conversations, if you're dispersing the weight of these things among lots of trusted adults, that's less burden on you as a parent, which I think can be
Yes.
really important. And that is historically how children were raised, and it's only in our very recent industrialized past that we have gotten so siloed in these small parenting clusters, and that's really hard. It's very hard. I mean, particularly during COVID right now, we are in a parenting crisis. I mean, parents are so under supported,
Yes.
um, and kids are having a lot of mental health problems right now.
Absolutely.
And so I think parents are just, burning the candle at both ends, and so are their children for lots of different reasons. So, um, one of the things that you bring up is the reflect acronym. Can you talk about what that is and what that does for parents?
Yeah. So this is what I think as parents, we have to reflect when we get it wrong. And then we have to reflect when we get it wrong, where it comes from. So the reflect cycle of parenting is really, the R is like, first reflect on your response. Like, why did I respond that way? Where did it come from? Is it tied to something that happened to me in my childhood? Is this the way that my mom or dad responded to me? So really think about where it comes from. The E is like evaluate how you're feeling, because sometimes we may scream at our child for something, but it's really because we're tired, or it's really because we're hungry, or because we're frustrated. So really evaluate your own feelings, name what those feelings are, and how your actions aligned or didn't align with those real feelings. And then the F is to find out how your response impacted your child. So this is like the critical step, because if I screamed at you because I'm frustrated about a deadline at work, I need to go to you and say, how did that make you feel? I'm recognizing that I'm really not angry at you. I'm upset because I have this deadline that is stressing me out. What did that do for you? How did that make you feel inside? And having them talk about their own feelings. The L is to go back to your core values, like lean into your core values. I'm a big proponent of families creating core values and not just saying these are the things that are important to us, writing them down, discussing them as a family, holding everybody accountable to those core values. So when things are out of line, you can ask yourself concretely, do these align with my core values? If it doesn't, then what do I need to go do to get back on track? So leaning into those core values. The E is to explore more ways that you can react the next time. So if I am working on a deadline and my child is coming to me, I need to have a system in place so that my child will know that I really need to get this deadline done. And I need to know that I'm not going to explode on them next time, but next time I'm going to do this XYZ. And then the E is no, that was the E. The C is capture time for grace. So that's basically giving yourself a moment. If you need a timeout, if you need to breathe and meditate, if you need to just take 5 deep breaths to really kind of center yourself, make sure you're taking that moment to do that. And then the T is to take action. So what am I going to do? How am I going to show up differently next time? Let me start working on that. And then, you start it over. We're not perfect parents. And so we're going to have those moments that we respond in a way that's not appropriate or doesn't align with our core values. So going through some kind of cycle or some kind of reflection to really help you to ground yourself and take time to talk to your child about what happened.
I mean, the beautiful thing about this model is that it is very it is a lot, it's very vulnerable and shows a lot of humility with your children. It also is a really good model for how to sort of enact an apology or make amends or change your behavior in any situation. It doesn't just have to be with your children. And I think one of the things that we see with white parents is, white supremacy really teaches us to never apologize. And so then, a lot of white people genuinely want to understand how to apologize and make amends, particularly when they have hurt, a person of color in their life. But that often goes so badly because many white people have legit never figured out or been taught how to go from a genuine, make a genuine apology and amends and change behavior, right? Like that it's not just like, I'm sorry, you felt bad, right? Like
Right. Yes. Yes.
it's like the whole cycle of, let me think about this, let me figure out all of the pieces, because we also are beings in bodies, right? And a lot of the time what goes wrong is that we didn't sleep enough and we're hungry, right? Like
That's right.
that's very real, and I appreciated that you put that in there. It's also a really helpful way when you model that for a child to remind them that, like, that's why you still take a nap and that's why you need to eat a snack. Like,
Yes.
you
And
know,
you say out loud, okay, I'm lashing at you. Did I eat? Did I stay up too late last night? Like you say these out loud so that you can then get your child to start doing the body check, right? When they're like, even with my kids, I'm like, when they are cranky, I'm like, okay, what time did you go to sleep last night? What kind of food did you eat today? So that they can start connecting and not just saying, you are so cranky today. Like
right.
you want to help them make those connections so that they show up as their best selves as many times as possible.
And that somatic sense. So many children, yeah, never develop those tools because their parents don't have those tools to do that kind of internal scan. And I think that leads, going back to safety, it's like if you don't have a somatic awareness or a bodily awareness, then when we bring up things like sexual abuse or other kinds of lack of safety, um, fear around the police, or some of these other things where you're in a physically dangerous situation, we want our children to trust their instincts, and we also want them to know when they've been touched in a wrong way or something bad has happened, and we want them to be able to know it was bad, articulate what happened, and tell us, right? And so I think,
Yes.
um but that starts with being able to say, to know more about your body in general, right? And how your body affects everything. And so I thought you did a lot of parents are very nervous about talking about sexual abuse, um and often so many fears get mixed up with other fears, right? And so it's like, parents who are worried about their children being sexually abused then put other racialized fears on top of that, right? and
Yes.
and that is how racism is perpetuated, intentionally, by people who have an investment in that, right? um and that's obviously our whole the whole of American history is that.
That's right. That's right.
But separating that out and teaching our kids how to do that. Can you talk a little bit about sort of that scene in the book where you're talking to all of your children, your sons and your daughter, about body awareness and sexual safety?
Yeah, so we were actually watching TV, like I don't know what we were watching, something, but a commercial or something that came on that, I call them my teachable mom moments that my kids sometimes are like, oh my God, here it goes, right? So I paused the TV and I said to them, you guys all know what this means, right? Do you know what being sexually harassed means or sexually abused? And, yeah, so we just go down the list of, okay, when somebody does that to you, they're going to tell you not to tell me, right? And you can always tell me, right? Yes. So I make sure everybody's, listening, everybody answers separately. And they're going to tell you that if you tell me, they may hurt somebody. They're going to tell you that it was your fault. And it's never your fault. So we go through all of these things so that they know that if they're ever touched or abused in any ways, we've gone through all these excuses that people will give them to try to get them to not tell me. And I wanted to make sure they knew what all of these things were. And, they were on the outside, they were getting annoyed, like, yes, mom, can we go back to the movie? And, I went through all this thing. And then the next day or later that night, I can't remember, my youngest son came to me and laid with me in the bed and said, Mom, thank you for always believing me. Right. And so at that moment, you don't know when it's clicking, but you just have to keep at it and know that the foundation that you're laying for them through these open dialogues, it's going to come um, full circle at some point. Even when we're having like we have like these family meetings, and it's supposed to be our safe space where we could say anything and do anything. And oftentimes my kids would, test that. They would say things that they know I may not like, but I try to, zip it and allow them to have that space because I promised them safe space. But sometimes it goes bad. It seems like it's going bad. And sometimes I get angry because I'm like, this is serious and it's all like a joke. But what I would say to parents when they feel like nobody's listening or it gets hard is that you have to kind of dig in and keep doing it, because at some point they're going to get it. Even when it seems like they're not getting it and they're not listening, you're going to see that it's going to come back in different forms that you say they got it. So
I,
keep at it.
I have a mother who it did a lot of just conditioning my whole childhood from, talking about what was on television. I mean, I was just talking about how my mother, when I was 7 years old, made me sit and watch the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas trial and explain everything that was going on, which was a lot for a 7-year-old. But, she was like, what's happening to this woman is wrong. Like, this is wrong. Here's why. Like, we live in a sexist society. I'm going to tell you about it. Like, and narrated the whole thing. And she also modeled, we were walking at the mall and this teenage couple, the boy was kind of holding the back of the girl's neck in a way that it was very clear she was uncomfortable with. And my mother is a very small woman and I was small at the time. And she just walked up to the girl and she said, do you want to come with us? Do you need a ride home? Do you need me to call anyone? And like, wouldn't. And the guy was calling my mom the B word and all this stuff. But, I mean, and she made sure that I saw it,
Yes.
And I think and I was 5, 6, 7 years old when some of this stuff happened, but I remember all of that. And it
I
was
love your mom, by the way.
yeah. I mean, it was very powerful to me to see, like, yeah, you don't just leave people, alone.
Yes.
So,
And I did the same thing with the Kavanaugh hearing because we were in the car listening to it on NPR with my kids coming home from school. Same thing. I put the car in the garage, in the driveway. We sat there. I explained to them what was going on. We talked about it. We talked about what no means, coming from a girl, that they have the right to say no as well. Um, what no means, even if the word no is not coming out of their mouths, what that looks like, what that feels like. And my kids were the same age. They were 7, 8, and 9 at the time.
yeah. I mean, I think people often think, oh, I can't talk about that because then I have to explain all this other stuff. It's like, children understand fairness, they understand safety, they understand bodily integrity, all of those things.
Yes. And you
So
meet them where they are in terms of their age, right? And then every year you grow and you go a little bit deeper with a little bit more detail.
yeah, I mean, and I like that the structure of this book is blueprints and building blocks, right? And so, and the foundation. So that metaphor is already built into this, but it's it's really useful. And I think people will be able to plug in wherever you are, folks who are watching at home. I think you can just pick this up and plug right in. We have a question from Michael and Allie Stonewright. They said, I could listen to you tell stories about your family all night. Do you have a favorite anecdote from the book that you haven't shared yet?
Oh, good question. Um, I don't know if this is my favorite, but this is one that stands out to me because it talks about the power of allyship. So my girlfriend and I, this was before kids, but we were at a boot camp where it was run by an ex-Marine. It was a summer boot camp, and we're both teachers, so we're off. And it was like a 3 day, 3 times a day. We did work out with him for 8 weeks. And by the end of that, we were all just a close knit group. And my girlfriend and I were the only Black people in the group. And we did a lot of things together outside of the boot camp. Just it became a little family. And at the end of the last workout, we were doing our last stretch, after the workout was done. And the trainer asked his children to pick up all the equipment. And so the daughter jumped right up. She may have been 10 or 11 and started picking up all the cones and all the things. And the son, who's a couple years younger, got up slowly, like his shoulders were slouched, and he was dragging his flip flops across the basketball court. And the daughter turned around to the son and she said, "Hey, stop acting like a nigger. Stop acting lazy." Right. And it was like this was a family that we had built. And it was so shocking to hear this coming from people that we loved. And of course, everybody immediately turns to my girlfriend and I, but there was like no support, no words said, just the two of us really trying to kind of backpedal what just happened. And I use that example because in that moment, we needed allyship, right? Didn't have to be anything big. It could have been just a touch of a hand. It could have been like, "I'm sorry that happened," or any little gesture to say that we weren't alone. And then all of a sudden, this family that we had, we started thinking, well, does everybody feel that way? Because nobody's saying anything that was wrong with what was said. Um, and I'm not saying that they all did, but because you didn't say anything, it made me feel like I don't know if I trust anybody. And then it also is about this idea of being an upstander, right? That we don't want to raise just good people, because I'm sure all of those people were good people. I thought they were all good people, but raising good people is just not enough. We have to raise people who are not just going to do no harm, but raise kids who will intercede when harm is done. I mean,
Mhm.
that's really what the book is about. How do we raise children that are better than good people, but are people who will stand up when it's needed for people who have less power in that moment?
And I think that's so key. So sort of as the book turns towards the end, action, activism, right? It's not enough to just be in your house. Your values are important, but in fact, even your last family value is action, right? Like, what do we do? So even as you're having these conversations about, engaging your children around homelessness, for example, you start brainstorming with your children. What can we do? What would you do? And I think sometimes people are afraid to take that step because they're like, well, we can't end poverty, right? So, or we can't end racism. And it's like, there are a lot of steps between between
Yeah.
nothing and this, right? And so, you know, I think, allyship without action is empty, right? And so what is it when people are just starting out, which I think a lot of times people it takes a lot of baby steps to get to action. And I think a lot of people are um paralyzed by the idea that they may make a misstep, and so they make no step, which is a bigger misstep, right?
Yes.
but
Yes.
but do you have advice for um helping parents think about what are some kid-sized actions that families can take that feel integrated with the core values?
I think, okay, at low hanging fruit here, right? We always talking about read books. I think beyond reading books, we need to discuss books. Like, you can't just read the pages of the book without really talking about what does this really mean? Who's in power here in this story? Why do you think they felt that way? What do you think the opposite side of that would have felt? So I think learning how to discuss books with our kids in a very kind of critical literacy way, and not just thinking that we're reading book. Everybody keeps saying read books, but I think it's the dialogue that goes along with the books that are really helpful to our kids, because they get to ask more questions, and we get to see what they're really learning. So that could be a great first step for parents who don't want to do anything more. The other thing that I say too is we all have, I sometimes I get pushed back on this word. We all have things that have passion projects, right? There are some social issues that are really important to us, whether it's the environment, whether it's race issues, whether it's unhoused people in our communities, whatever that is. I think that's where you start, because you already have knowledge of that. You already have a passion for that area. It's easy for you to kind of step out of your comfort zone a little bit to start action. And once you do action in one particular area, it's like a snowball, right? It makes it easier to take action in other areas. If I know a lot about sustainability and environmental issues, I wrote letters to the governor or to the state or to wherever about this. Why can't I then do this when it comes to race issues or sexual orientation or gender issues? So you can do the things that you feel most comfortable in the space that you're in. And then think about how that same action can be done in a space that you're not as comfortable in. And let me echo what you just said. Doing nothing is probably the worst mistake that you can make. Um, it is part of the growing and learning. I try to be an advocate for the LGBTQ community. I make mistakes all the time, right? I don't know. It's not the same for me as it is for me talking about race issues. Um, and so, but it doesn't stop me for trying. And so I think doing nothing is the worst thing that you can do. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all growing. We're all learning. And we're at a time right now that people are getting a little bit more grace because we see that people are trying. Um, and don't be afraid to reach out to somebody. Like I have people who reach out to me, maybe I am their one Black friend. I don't know. But I feel like it's my job to teach, right? I don't want to say you need to go and learn, because this is about my kids, right? I want you to know what to do, how to show up for my children in a way that you're protecting and you're keeping them safe too. So I think finding a confidant that you can ask the questions to, I think that's okay too.
Well, and there are people of every identity that are in positions to be teachers that have chosen that, right? As you have, right? And I think that's the important thing, is like make sure that the person that you're reaching out to has chosen that position and is actually an educator, right? Like in whatever way, right? Because some people, I think genuinely are like, I am not your educator, right?
Yes, yes.
Today, right? And I
It's
think,
true. It's two different schools of thoughts there,
yeah,
right? And
and
I
I mean,
just think if I'm not teaching you, then how are you going to learn?
right.
That's my thought on that. Yeah.
And I think there are I think there are people of every identity who are thrilled to be asked, right? Because we don't want misinformation, right? Like we don't
Mhm.
want people so I think it's really about, and the beauty of the internet, and the one good thing that's come out of COVID is there's so much free material out there. You can watch
It's true.
endless webinars, you can watch endless conferences, all these things. Karis has a million book talks. We have parenting groups, twice a month. There's so much that you can plug into for free, even if you live in a really isolated community. So
Mhm.
in my, there's no excuse and there's no reason not to get involved, and I think the thing that I always come back to is, particularly for white parents, um, you're the option to turn on and off, is deadly for other people's children, and
Mhm.
we can't forget that, and I think, that comes through in this book is very generous, but I think that's, at the end of the day, that's what the stakes are, is that is that for white parents, choosing to look away and to not consider all the children of the world and focus only on your child is devastating. It's
Yeah.
murderous, right? And so I really appreciate how applicable all of your parenting tips are. But I think especially for white parents, like this is such an important book to check out and just start practicing, because you said also how you practice is how you play, which I love.
Yes. Yeah, and I use the analogy that, my son's basketball coaches, they're like, you need to be outside shooting 100 free throws a day. You just do, because that builds memory, right? And it's the same thing with activism. It's the same thing with being compassionate and being kind. It's the muscle memory that we want to build, these habits of kindness, these habits of being compassionate, these habits of self reflection that really will make major shifts in the way we raise our children and in the way that our children who they become as they enter their adult years.
So is there anything that you wanted to touch on that we didn't get to yet?
The only thing that comes to mind is maybe thinking about how you can build on the rocks of social justice parenting, which we hit on a lot with the self-reflection and the open dialogue. One thing I just want to say, the rocks are like the foundation of social justice. So it's reflection, open dialogue, compassion, kindness, and social engagement. I want to just say one thing about the compassion and kindness pieces that we didn't touch on that much, that we should be looking at this idea of compassion and kindness in three levels, right? One is self, which is hard, right? The self compassion and the self kindness, we forget that a lot, but our kids are always watching. So we are teaching them how we treat ourselves is the way that we're teaching them to treat themselves, which is really, really important, because how are you going to treat other people a certain way when you don't have those skills of uh, treating yourself in a way that's honorable. And so we need to look at it in terms of our self compassion and kindness. And then the next level is looking at it in terms of what we're doing in our house. How does compassion and kindness align with our core values? And how are we giving our families members grace and space, right? When mistakes are made, what does that look like in our house? And then when we do that often in our homes, it's an easy transition to the world. So the third level is now, how do we take that compassion and kindness and we put it out into the world? And that's through some of our activism, that's through some of our volunteerism. It's through writing the letters to our school boards or our government or any of those things, that we are extending it out into our communities, into the world.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think it's so important. And I think, especially for parents, again, who feel so burnt out right now, being self-critical is endemic. I think a lot of people feel like failures when it's systemic failure. It's not individual failure, right? But it's hard to not feel like, well, I'm doing poorly at all of this. And so remembering that self-talk and remembering your kids are watching. um, and we hear that a lot, from people who you know have body issues because they heard their mothers call themselves fat all the time, right? And it's like, that's really sad.
Yes,
But it's not just about bodies, it's about everything, right? And so um it's for better and for worse, the little ones are always paying attention to what we do.
that's
And
right.
it's really key that, you know, even on our rough days, even if it's like, I'm just gonna take a time out and close my door. I'm gonna take my breaths, like, alone.
Yes,
I'm gonna get back to you. Like, take it doesn't mean being perfect. It means modeling imperfection and apologizing and coming back to center and all those things, which
absolutely.
I think what's great about this is a very realistic book. You're not setting parents up you know, to be saints. You're saying, we all have trouble sometimes, and here's some very concrete, practical things you can do that will actually set you up for success.
Thank you. That was really the goal, to try to make it as not easy content, but easy read and accessible. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you've absolutely succeeded, and I think people are going to be really excited and surprised at how well this will plug into a daily sort of practice, and how, you know, if you can meal plan, if you can do some of these other things, you can absolutely start doing some of these reflections and, you know, some of this journaling, because I think it will really help, you know, do a reset, you know, at maybe at the end of the school year or going into the holidays or whatever. I think it could be a great time for folks. So thank you so much, Dr. Baxley. I'm really, really glad that we got to help you launch your book tour. I hope that the rest of it is just really successful and fun for you, and that the book will continue to do well.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is great. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. And I want folks to know you can just click this teal button at the bottom center of your screen to buy Social Justice Parenting from Karis. You can also let folks know that the replay of this will be available immediately after this. So if you know folks who wanted to be here but couldn't, they can watch it as soon as we're done here. And then I'll also be adding captions and putting it up on our YouTube channel. So in a couple days, I'll be able to check it out there. Dr. Baxley, can you tell folks where they should follow you online, on social media, all that stuff? Because you're very active.
Yeah, we call ourselves a village. The Social Justice Parenting Village is on Instagram at Social Justice Parenting. That's where most of the action happens. If you want to know anything else about what I do, you can go to the website, which is the same name, socialjusticeparenting.com. And on Twitter and LinkedIn, I'm at Traci Baxley.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And I hope that eventually we'll get to host you in person in the store post-COVID.
Yes, that'd be awesome. All right. I can't wait to come visit the store.
Yes, please do. Well, we have a great children's section too, so bring your kids.
Awesome. Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.